Steve Zeltzer with Workweek in Pacifica, and we're with today Mametlwe Sebei. He's the president of the General Industrial Workers Union of South Africa, and his union, along with many other unions in South Africa, have been supporting the fight against the attack on Gaza by Israel and the role of the United States in supporting the genocide that's going on in Palestine. Welcome to our show.
Thank you, and to our viewers, Steve.
So maybe you can say, what is the position of your union and other unions in South Africa in regard to what's going on in Israel and the situation of the Palestinians?
I mean, I think, our solidarity with the people of Palestine is well known, and we have campaigned over years, and I think that campaign has never been more important in the context of ongoing carnage, and I think genocide, insofar as we are concerned, that is unfolding currently in Gaza. We do think that there is an intentional and deliberate war with a view of destroying Gaza, of ethnically cleansing it of its people. And I think this is evident not only in terms of incriminating or self-incrimination in the rhetoric of the entire Israeli establishment, from the Prime Minister, the President, cabinet ministers, members of parliament, and senior officials in the military and the bureaucratic apparatus of the Israeli state, but also ordinary soldiers on the ground. It's also evident in the amount of destruction, both of life but also of infrastructure. I mean, it's estimated at the present moment that over 30,000 people have been killed, if you include those that are said to be under the rubble, which is fair to say that at this point in time, we should assume that they're dead. And if you look at the fact that over 85% of the population is displaced because their houses, their homes have been bombed, the schools, the hospitals have not been spared, the clinics, the mosques, the churches. Basically, if you take north of Gaza, it's unlivable. And that is not a collateral damage. That is an intentional and deliberate destruction on the part of the Israeli state. And that is what we need to stop. And for that, we have been mobilizing our solidarity to protest the carnage on the part of the Israeli state, but also their Western imperialist allies that have backed, that have cheered, that have armed and equipped them in carrying out this genocide, as well as shielding them from accountability.
And the United States was involved in supporting the apartheid regime in South Africa. They helped Chief Buthelezi. They gave him millions of dollars. The AFL-CIO through the CIA. The CIA funded the AFL-CIO operations in South Africa, supporting Chief Buthelezi, who was in favor of Bantustans. Thousands of trade unions were killed. Now the United States is involved openly in sending bombs, weapons for this genocide. What are the unions in South Africa saying about the role of the United States, since the United States, almost alone in the world, is supporting this regime?
Well, for us, is a continuation of the same policy that allowed them to support an apartheid South Africa. We see that policy extended to a support of regime that, insofar as the treatment of the Palestinians, both in the 1948 Israel, but also in West Bank, they have been practicing, a policy worse than apartheid in many instances. So therefore, there is nothing very surprising. It is absolutely disgusting and despicable that in the 21st century we should be talking about the right to equality. That in the 21st century we can't, that we should be fighting almost a 19th century style of colonialism in this century and so on. And I think what it has revealed, of course, is a hypocrisy of Western imperialism. But I also think that it does show that under capitalism, none of the achievements that we're going to take for granted are permanent. That unless we overthrow, unless we overturn the system of global capitalism, racism, national oppression, racial oppression, violence, wars, all of these are inherent in the system, built on exploitation of the overwhelming majority of the population and, of course, of the land for the benefit of the few. And I think this is what is playing out in Israel, in Gaza, but I think also that the interests of American and Western imperialism are vested in that, in the exploitation of the regime. And in that, obviously, the U.S. or rather Israeli state is the project of for the advancement of the interests of Western imperialism. And that is the reason that notwithstanding this or that secondary criticism, embarrassment, and the conduct of what is arguably the most extreme right-wing regime, even by the Zionist standards of the Israeli state, that is carrying out this daylight murder, mass murder, and genocide, massive ethnic cleansing and displacement that they can't even hide. They brag about, they openly state to the embarrassment of their Western allies that are finding or trying to find every excuse in the world to explain the genocide that is actually happening there, to explain the settler colonialism in West Bank, to explain a medieval-style brutal siege of Gaza, and all the things that really are just not explicable, because they're despicable, and I think they should be unacceptable. So I think for us, it is really a question that the support that they are giving Israeli state is a support that we know very well, that they spoke about all sorts of things to rationalize their relationship with an apartheid South Africa. Constructive engagement at the time when the movement, both in South Africa, South Africa, it had reached, if you like, pre-revolutionary, state where the mass of black working class had rendered townships and workplaces more and more ungovernable. And I think the growth of the international solidarity movement was in such a way that, the U.S. had to change tune. The best position that they could give, even in those situations, was a so-called constructive engagement. And in that, they had to find those black leaders, by which they mean puppets of the apartheid regime, like Buthelezi, that they could try and bolster, that they could prop into an acceptable face of aspirations of the black majority, and which they said would be able to understand that any form of transition could be done with a full agreement of the white minority. And by that they meant, let's be clear about it, it wasn't the white people that actually they had in mind. They meant that any form of transition should be on the basis that the private monopoly over the commanding heads of the economy, over the mines, over the banks, over the land, remains on the, in the hands of monopoly corporations, many of which originate in the US, in the UK, in Germany, and other, allies of US imperialism. It is those interests that played out and that were articulated in the opposition relation to apartheid South Africa. And it's precisely those interests that are also informing and dictating their policy in relation to Israel.
And the ideology of Zionism, racist ideology of Zionism, in which the Palestinians and others are second-class people, they worked with the Nazis. They invited Adolf Eichmann to Palestine, get the Nazis to support the formation of a Jewish state. This right-wing movement, fascist movement internationally that's developing, of fascist parties, Malay in Argentina, there's going to be a general strike in Argentina of the working class against this fascist regime. What is the connection between the United States supporting the Zionist regime, which is committing genocidal policies, and the rise of right-wing fascists all over the world and the threat to the working class internationally?
I mean, fascism isn't that it's just another political wing, of the capitalist class, right? Which obviously they whip up in the context of the threats of a revolution and an increasing revolt of the working class that we have seen across big parts of the world. Now, the collaboration between Israeli state and, of course, Nazis is not limited to Germany, where you could see even today parties, right-wing parties like AfD, are some of the most enthusiastic supporters of Israeli state in their bloodshed, in their genocide in Gaza. And it's also there in the history of the relationship between Israeli state and apartheid regime. You see, the first prime minister of South Africa to visit Israel was John Foster. John Foster, in his youth, was arrested by a white minority regime of Jan Smuts for support of the Nazi party. A lot of an apartheid, a lot of the leaders of the apartheid party called the Nationalist Party, many of them went to university, studied, and were quite open and enthusiastic supporters of Hitler in their youth, and they did not change their ideology in the post-Second World War period. In fact, most of their policies were inspired by Nazi, policies in Germany itself, and to the extent that they had to find accommodation with Zionism in Israel. It's because of their own isolation, but I think also because of their own imperialist interests. But also even domestically, they actually were clearly and openly anti-Semite. But they had a problem. Their problem was what they called a population problem, where they rested on a tiny support of the white minority, which they wanted to replenish at every opportunity. So having initially discriminated against the Jewish migrants that were running from Holocaust from Europe, and they decided, well, this we could incorporate into a white minority that could then be subservient to the agenda of holding down the overwhelming majority of the black working class for a ruthless exploitation and enslavement by the big monopoly corporations that dominate the economy, the corporations that belong to U.S. and Western multinational companies. So it was in that context that they began to open the flag, and the Israeli state welcomed a man that led a pro-Nazi rallies in South Africa. They welcomed him in Tel Aviv, and today they have a guts to tell us those who oppose real Nazis that were anti-Semite, when they actually embraced, when they assisted pro-Nazi regime to develop a nuclear weapon that was intended to obliterate any black opposition, particularly coming from the neighboring state, in the event that the guerrilla movement of the ANC in a form of MK and also in a form of APLA in the case of PSC, that they gained mass character and they threatened military invasion from one of those so-called frontline states, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and all of that. That reason that they wanted an atomic bomb. And who gave them that atomic bomb? It was Israel that helped them to develop the atomic bomb. So the people that today want to lecture us about anti-Semitism, they are the people that equipped and openly pro-Nazi regime with a nuclear weapon. You can't be more anti-Semitic than that. So that's the reason we should never concede even an inch of ground to this kind of blackmail. What we stand for in Palestine is the right of Palestinians to their own land. It's the right of the Palestinians to self-determination. And we would argue that such a struggle need to be carried out by the working class, the working masses of Palestine, and of course, of Israel itself. And even when in this day they are, boycotted, there is a need to develop a class program that could ensure an overthrow of the Zionist state, and to ensure that on the basis of that, the masses of Palestine are free, and they are able to build a genuinely independent, and we would argue, a socialist Republic of Palestine that could live in peace, and alongside, the socialist Israel in a federation from the river to the sea that would allow the return of all the millions of Palestinian people that are today scattered all over the world and in refugee camps around the Middle East and so on. That is only just a democratic solution to that problem, and it can only be solved first and foremost by the masses of the Palestinian working class fighting and resisting, and on the basis of that, putting forward a program that will drive the wedge between the Israeli state, the Israeli establishment, and of course the masses of many oppressed and exploited people inside Israel. By the way, there are people, from Ethiopia that are facing discrimination in Israel. There are people, the Druze, that increasingly are facing discrimination in a situation where they want to make, Israel a Jewish state, exclusive to the Jewish people, and of course the inclusion of other groups and so on. Those are the people that the program for liberation of Palestine must drive the wedge between them and the Israeli establishment and its Zionist political movement and state. And on the basis of that, it will be possible to build a fraternity that will create a condition for a genuine socialist revolution that will change the lives of ordinary people on both sides of the camp to ensure that we raise living standards, and of course everyone can be able to live a better life for all.
Now the Houthis and Yemen are attacking shipping, Israeli shipping. They want to shut off the Red Sea to Israel. The United States now, Britain and other imperialist countries are bombing Yemen and attacking the people of Yemen. And the South African government has filed a suit in the World Court to say that to rule that Israel is committing genocide, and it's supported by Brazil, it's supported by other countries. If it is the case that Israel is committing genocide, is a unlawful state, a lawless state, why isn't there a movement to shut off all trade, all relations with Israel, to blockade all products and to stop it by direct action of the working class and of countries around the world?
The ANC government is posturing when it comes to the question of Palestine. They are not sincere, they are not genuine. Even if, they are sincere at the personal level, what is important is what is the class basis of the policy of the ANC government. And I think that is true of both the domestic and the foreign policy. ANC government is in the service of the big corporation that monopolize the economy. And those big corporations are part and integral component of the global system of capitalism, in which, in particular, in the case of South Africa, those interests tie them to Western imperialism and Zionism by implication. And that is the reason that they can't pursue any consistent policy. And as I've said before, the policy by which they betray the black working class in the country domestically, as we have seen, not only in terms of an appalling conditions of life of the black working class majority, because the economy is still not on their hands, because the economy is still monopolized by the same corporate interests that owned it under apartheid regime, and that erected an architecture of an apartheid system in order to reign on them, in order to enslave them for their exploitation and profiteering. That not only is that their commitment to that has created conditions that are appalling for the working class. We've seen it in Marikana as well, where the ANC, in no unmistaken language, right, it registered in the most bloodiest fashion its loyalty towards the mining corporations in defense of their profits at the expense of those of the mine workers that elevated to power. So it is merely an application of that very pro-cooperate class policy and program of the ANC domestically, that they are applying it at the international level, that it translates into a pro-Zionist and a pro-Western imperialist foreign policy, with, of course, a caveat that they have to be posturing, just as they are doing also domestically, on the basis, or precisely because the link, the historical connection between the struggle of the Palestinian people and that of the masses of the black working class in South Africa is in such a way that it is within the living memory. That many of the accounts of how the Palestinians are translated resonate with the experiences and the memory of many black South Africans in terms of what life was like under apartheid. But also, it is not lost on many, including on the ordinary rank and file, the ANC cadres who fought in the camps. They do remember that it was also the PLO that was partly also supplying them arms at a time when many of their newly found Western imperialist friends did not want to arm them and had categorized and defined them as terrorists. I mean, people don't know that even by the time that Mandela died, according to U.S. law, he was classified as a terrorist. That's the reason that until quite recently, actually, they arrested one of his member of cabinet because of his role in the struggle against apartheid and so on, quite recently. I'm talking about a story of a few years ago. So, because of that, the ANC had to factor the attitude, and especially in the context of the breathtaking, scale of mobilization for the Palestinian cause in the past 2-3 months, in the context of the elections that are coming, where they've really nothing to show the black working class. So the best that I think they could do from their point of view was to, take this symbolic, measure of fighting the case of genocide at the International Court of Justice, which they know, one, is going to be decided primarily by judges that are political appointments of many of these Western imperialist countries, but also even if under a hot breath of the global working class protest for Palestine, these judges could do the right thing, which is to find Israel guilty as charged. And Israel is guilty as charged. If you look at the definition of genocide, they have passed all the thresholds. There's an element of intent. It's quite overwhelming, as I've said, in the rhetoric of this extremely right Zionist regime in Israel, in terms of what is the aim of their military campaign. A scale of destruction, both of life, of the infrastructure, speak to that. And the target is clear. It is the Palestinian people in Gaza who they want to eliminate and remove from Gaza, which is also the reason that they are negotiating with countries like Congo, where they want to force these people to go after Egypt made it clear in no uncertain terms that they will not allow them to be relocated in any of their territory and so on. So the ANC knows that even if the court was to find Israel guilty, the enforcement of that relies on the United States. On the United Nations Security Council, where the United States has a right of veto, right? So there is no likely consequence of any material significance that turns on this case from where we stand. That said, of course, in a situation where they filed, the case. We do support it. We do think that it will be an opportunity for us to disabuse people of illusions in this institution on the judicial cretinism, particularly when it comes to institutions of so-called global justice system, which are really just tools, an instrument in a Western imperialist global order.
And on February 24th will be the 2-year anniversary of the Ukraine war, which the United States and the Western imperialist countries have been continuing to support, and the United States helped provoke that war. There are going to be worldwide protests on February 24th at U.S. military bases. The U.S. military is actively engaged in Africa, has bases all over Africa, including Niger. At the same time, the working class in South Africa, the United States, Japan, many countries, there's no working class political party. There's no working class alternative. How do you see the development of a working class movement both against imperialist war, the war in Ukraine, the genocide in Palestine, with the formation of a working class party and an independent working class political movement of the trade unions around the world?
I mean, we've got to obviously, oppose imperialism wherever it is, and not just Western imperialism, but world imperialism, including on the part of Russia, particularly in the context of the war in Ukraine, contrary to what many so-called leftists are doing, where they seem to suggest that Russia, which is one of the powerful imperialist countries in the world, is actually engaged in any form of anti-imperialist struggle. What you see in Ukraine is an inter-imperialist conflict, at least from the point of view of Russia and that of NATO, and particularly the United States, that is central to that. Now, for me, we have got to, build a movement against war and against current warmongering, against militarization, that are actually threatening a human extinction in a context where most major powers are armed with nuclear weapons, and the amount of nuclear arsenals in the world is such that basically this planet can be destroyed many times over. One thing that I think has stayed in the hands of imperialist powers is precisely the threat, of working class revolt at the prospect of a nuclear war. And it is that threat that we must maintain, but also that threat that actually must materialize. That is to say, we need to build a movement today to oppose a war, but I think also should strike first before imperialism can do that. And the only way that you could build a sustainable solution to the threat of nuclear conflagration is actually overthrowing capitalism and imperialism itself. And that means we've got to build a movement, first and foremost, on the current issues facing the working class, the conditions of wages, the cost of living crisis, unemployment. But I think also that it can't just be activism where we campaign from an issue to issue without any political strategy. We do need political strategy. And that's the reason that for us, that means a campaign for a mass political party of the working class in every of the country where today, and I think that's a great majority of the world, where there's a crisis of political organization, there's a crisis of political leadership of the working class. And we think that this anti-war movement that is emerging, particularly on the question of Palestine, but also I think in other countries on the question of Ukraine and so on, is also the basis on which we should, alongside the struggle in the context of South Africa, for civil delivery, for wage increases, but also for access to education, because there is an important report that I think is on the horizon. And by that, I don't mean necessarily in the coming weeks. It may very well play itself next year or the year after that, on the question of cuts on spending on education, that is excluding many, that is hundreds of thousands of working class youth And we need to connect those struggles into a movement that could lay the foundation for the creation of the mass political part of the working class on a socialist program to ensure that the working classes, not only political power, but economic power, which for us is only possible on the program to nationalize the mines, the banks, the factories, on the basis of democratic control and management of the working class. And that, we think, is a solution to the crisis of poverty, of unemployment, of access to education, but also of collapsing public services, but also is a solution to the crisis of war and inter-imperialist and growing inter-imperialist tensions that are threatening humanity with a nuclear holocaust, if you think.
In recolonization in Africa, you have the situation in Namibia where Chinese state and private companies have basically privatized or taken over all the uranium mines, all the marble mines, the road construction, and have captured the government, SWAPO, and basically captured the courts, the judicial system. This recolonization of Africa, not just Namibia, but other countries, Zimbabwe, how do you see that struggle in the context of the working class? Because there is an argument that we have to support China and Russia against U.S. imperialism.
I mean, the scramble for Africa is very much part of the growing global geopolitics and the struggle between various camps of imperialism. And I think that is very clear in almost every country of Africa. I think we've spoken about South Africa itself before. It attempts to maneuver between the two blocks of imperialism. One, the economy is, heavily integrated and still by and large dominated by Western imperialist interests. And that's the reason that they can't take and maintain consistent and principled position in relation to Western imperialism and its projects like that of Israeli Zionism. But on the other hand, the Chinese and the Russian are not there. And I mean, the issue that you described in Namibia is not exceptional. Those are stories we hear of workers from all over. And I want to argue that even the Russians will not be, that different. I mean, look at what's actually happening now in East Africa, where increasingly, and I think quite correctly, masses of African people are voting against Western imperialism. I mean, France, in the past few months, its military has been expelled from Burkina Faso, from Niger, where they basically threatened a war with the new coup leaders. But they blinked. They flinched, when the deadline was approaching, simply because they know that the anti-imperialist or anti-French imperialist sentiment is not just a phenomenon with the military leaders. It is, a very popular sentiment of the masses of Niger, who have for many years witnessed oil being taken from their country, resources being taken from their country for the benefit of French imperialism and its cooperations and the exclusion of the vast majority of people in that country. So they have been, they've been forced to withdraw their army in Niger, and they've also been forced in Mali as well. I've also seen that in DRC, United Nations mission, which has been there for decades now, has been forced to withdraw. But also what they call the Eastern Community mission as well, which is mostly, countries that are more aligned with Western imperialism, has also been forced to withdraw. And the substitute is going to be a SADC mission. Now, SADC is dominated by South Africa, and I think South Africa is increasingly aligning itself with China and, of course, with Russia. And we've got to see these are no alternatives. This is but another form of imperialism, and it's not going to be any better. If anything, is much more worse because, there is, in the case particularly of Chinese corporations, an element of primitive accumulation, the methods that they apply in relation to their workforce, the brutality of exploitation, as well as the kind of the work regime that they implement in South Africa. But I think South Africa is much more better because of developed workers' movement. The accounts we hear of workers from all over the country, the continent, people who are working in Chinese companies, it's horrific stories of ruthless forms of enslavement. And that's the reason that I think we've got to see not Western imperialism, but also that Eastern imperialism is no alternative. And in fact, we need alternative to imperialism, we need alternative to capitalism. And that is only possible on the basis of an organized working class that is organized not only in trade unions, not only in massive civic movement, but has a political strategy and apparatus in a form of mass workers' party to carry out that strategy, to win over not only political power but economic power, to give back Africa to its people, that is to its working class, and which on the basis of its working class in power, it can be able, in struggle with the international working class, be able to ultimately eliminate the face of imperialism from the planet.
And your union is part of SOFTU in South Africa, and of course they support this fight against the Zionist regime. What are the political developments going on in the working class in South Africa and in the unions towards any kind of working class political movement, working class party?
Our resolution on the question of the Workers' Party is very clear. The differences, if I may sum them up, there is, I think there is, the way to sum up the difference, that there is unanimity in terms of the need for the Workers' Party. The differences has been on the character of the Workers' Party. There is a Stalinist wing of the movement that want what we argue will basically be, a South African Communist Party number 2, and which in this situation will be awfully inadequate for the task. But if anything, it will simply repel, many young working class people that are desperately in search of alternatives. And I think the outcome of an attempt to build such party are evident in the NUMSA project. But I also think that, that said, and despite our determination, we're faced with challenges, and most of which are of objective character. The working class has been hammered in the recent period, particularly in the context of COVID, but also of economic crisis that preceded COVID. The South African capitalist class has carried the most brutal restructuring that left many millions of workers out of their jobs. And with the economy recovering now, they are returning on the basis of precarious employment that makes unionization difficult. The end result of it is that, the working class as a force in society has been extremely weak. But that is not a permanent thing, right? As I've said, many workers are returning to work. And with that, we can expect that they will take up the struggle to try to recuperate what losses they suffered in the context of COVID, where many of them, of course, would have said, well, our employers are not doing fine, let's try to assist them to get over the worst. And when the worst is over, we will be able to talk more about how then do we reinstate our conditions. When for the point of view of the employer is, how do they exploit this crisis as they do with all other crises to ensure that they increase their profitability. Now, it is that background that is also a background to the weakening of the organization of the workers' movement. Trade unions in South Africa have lost 500,000 members in 2022 alone. That's a huge loss. I do think that for us to recover that, I do think that for us to be able to, grow again, but also on the basis of fresh layers, and we need a new wave of struggles. And I don't think that's a matter of if, it's when, because such a waves of struggles that about to happen, sooner or later, we will be able to, recover the membership loss. We will be able to recover the capacity of loss, but more than that, we will be able to replenish the forces of our movement, a new generation of young workers that are determined to fight, but are also open to possibilities of turning the world upside down. And of course, we believe they will look to the ideas of socialism, of Marxism, and I think the need to create a mass political party of the working class, which is our resolution, which I think they will be willing to take into action to ensure that we engage on a campaign for the formation of that party. And we begin the real work of building the structures and engaging through those structures in struggle to get even more forces with the aim that ultimately we need to seize power. We need to put the working class in power as the only condition in which we could have a socially transformation society.
And one of the major struggles in South Africa today has been the privatization of Eskom, the energy company, and also the privatization of the transportation, Transnet, privatization of Pier 2 in Durban, which has been sold to a Filipino contracting company. They're contracting out what were national resources, and they're saying that they're not working properly. And that's why they have to privatize them and contract them out. Do you think that this fight for a working class party is connected to the struggle against privatization, against the sellout of all resources in South Africa?
We have to take up those issues because what is the meaning of this is that the capitalist class want to redistribute the wealth again from the working class to the top rich. And they are handing what remains of few public assets to the big corporations to ensure that they have an outlet for profitable investment. They have sabotaged businesses. Eskom is in a situation that is not because of lack of collection, of tariffs and rates from many working class communities, as they want us to believe that if only they could collect the money of Eskom in Soweto, suddenly all will be rosy and all will be fine. That's nonsense. The reality is Eskom is being plundered, not even, by the way, by the criminal and corrupt tenders of the ANC, which are affected in a situation which we must oppose. I was saying that the state-owned entities, we need to defend them against the attempts to privatize them, against the corporate raiding, of many of them, either being Eskom, either being Prasa, either being Transnet, all of them. Because what is behind the agenda of privatization is obviously a search for an outlet for profitable corporate investment. It has nothing to do with revival of those services. Those services have been deliberately sabotaged. They've been plundered, and that's the reason that they are on their list today. And I was giving an example about Eskom, for instance, that, of course, there is a problem, right, of non-collection of revenue. Now, that problem, by the way, does not explain anything except to say that Eskom kept increasing tariffs almost as if the pockets of the working class is a bottomless pit from which you can just keep taking without a limit. And that we want is not going to work. That hasn't worked. And that's the reason that illegal connections are so widespread. Now, there is a problem of plunder of Eskom. That plunder, of course, is committed by the ANC through their tenders and so on. But even that does not begin to explain the kind of criminal plunder that's happening in ESCOM, most of which is legalized plunder by a big corporations in the supply chain or across the entire supply chain of ESCOM. One example is, for instance, the coal suppliers. Two major coal suppliers, Glencore, and of course, Glencore and Siriti. You just have to look at the deals that they do. Like Siriti took over a mine in 2019. That mine was owned by an Australian coal miner. Without a change in the quality and the quantity of the supply of coal to ESCOM, the price for which ESCOM is going to be paying, for per unit of coal to Siriti, that price has been adjusted by 30%, just at a change of ownership from the Australian miner to Siriti and so on. And that's because Siriti is politically connected. They are corrupting the political establishment, they are corrupting management and the board of ESCOM that is, of course, authorizing this. But also is what happens once ESCOM generates electricity. A lot of it is sold to so-called energy-intensive users. These are big smelters, and many of them, of course, are Australian-owned, with Australian-owned or South Point-owned smelters consuming approximately between 8 to 10% of ESCOM electricity, at the same time as they are contributing less than 1% of its income. That is kind of plunder that is actually taking place in ESCOM, and that is the reason that ESCOM is on its knees. It is that sabotage that can only be ended by ensuring that we place the state-owned entities, the public cooperation, under a democratic control and management of the working class, to ensure that committees, representatives of workers in those entities are actually, delegated to corporate government structures, the boards, alongside, representatives of community civics, alongside other public interests that need to inform decisions in ESCOM, that will appoint also practically minded engineers who knows how to do the work, to manage and to direct under a control of the working class, those particular enterprises, to ensure that they work in the interest of the majority of their service users and not in the interest of big cooperative profiteers.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us on our show. We've been talking with Mametlwe Sebei. He's the president of the General Industrial Workers Union of South Africa, and he's been discussing the issue of Zionism, the genocide going on in Palestine, and the world working class struggle and issues facing the world working class. So thanks for joining us on Work Week and Pacifica.
Thank you very much, and pleasure as always, and I hope to talk to you next time.